Hello to everyone, I am Benyamin Poghosyan and this is Viewpoint on Nոyan Tapan TV. Today we will discuss three main topics. First, the decision by European Commission to grant the candidate status for Ukraine and Moldova for EU membership and not to do that for Georgia. Then we will discuss the NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's views on the perspectives of war in Ukraine, and also we will touch upon the recent parliamentary elections in France and its implication on France's foreign policy. So first of all, Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia and their European aspirations. We all know that Georgia started its Euro-Atlantic aspiration back in 2002. Ukraine joined Georgia after Orange Revolution in late 2004. And also Moldova was back in force with its European integration when Dodon won the presidential elections in 2016. Moldova a little bit stopped its path and even became the observer in the Eurasian Economic Union. But then after Maia Sandu won the presidential elections in late 2020, Moldova again started to speak loudly about its Euro-Atlantic integration, both EU and NATO. However, the war in Ukraine significantly impacted the whole process. Almost immediately after the war, Ukraine officially applied to the European Commission and in general to the EU, asking them to make Ukraine or grant Ukraine a candidate status, and Georgia and Moldova immediately applied after that. There were some protest discussions in European Commission, and at the end of the day, on June 17, European Commission published its opinion asking the EU Council to grant Ukraine and Moldova candidate status. The European Council will take place this week on June 23, June 24, and all 27 states of the EU should vote to grant Ukraine and Moldova as a candidate status. Was this decision a surprise? Definitely not, because the day after the decision on June 16, German Chancellor, President of France and Prime Minister of Italy visited Kiev, and they made public statements that yes, we believe that Ukraine should become a candidate status for the EU membership. But first of all, let's understand what the candidate status is. Of course, it's another step towards the membership to the European Union, but it does mean almost nothing. Because, for example, we have a Turkey who has this candidate status since 1999, 23 years, but even after 23 years, there are very little, if any, chances that Turkey will become member of European Union. So first of all, let's fix that the status of candidate does not automatically mean that the country will become EU member, even within 10, 20 or 30 years. Then, when we are speaking about especially Ukraine's membership into EU, there is lack of understanding what state we are speaking about or what Ukraine we are speaking about. Ukraine, with its internationally recognized borders, including Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, Crimea, or we speak about Ukraine in the borders after the war, and by the way, no one knows what the borders will be, but most probably Ukraine will not exert any control over Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and even some people argue that at the end of the day, if not this year, but at least in 2023, Russian forces may take also Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and even Odessa, cutting Ukraine from the Black Sea. So the European Commission decision is a symbolic one, mostly is a symbolic one, to send some support or to express support to Ukraine, but it's very difficult to assess how the actual process of the membership will continue. Another interesting issue is the absence of Georgia. As I mentioned, Georgia in last 20 years, almost on a daily basis, speaks about its Euro-Atlantic aspirations. Even back during the presidency of Eduard Shevardnadze first, who said that yes, Georgia should become an EU member, Georgia should become a NATO member. And Georgia, as Ukraine and Moldova, signed association agreements with European Union in 2014. Now we have an interesting situation. According to European Commission view, the decision not to grant the candidate status to Georgia is due to lack of democracy in Georgia and due to problems in democratic reforms in Georgia in recent years. We all know that in recent years we have there are quite tensions between European Union or West in general and Georgia, and especially ruling Georgian Dream Party, European Union, United States, they accuse of Georgia of not making necessary reforms or even on backtracking on some of reforms. But from Georgian perspective, Georgian government believes that they are definitely ahead of Ukraine or Moldova, or at least they are on the same line if we speak about reforms, if we speak about readiness to receive a candidate status for the European Union. So many experts argue that this is a political decision, and decision was made to punish Georgia because Georgian government did not join this anti-Russia protests which we have in the West. Many times since February 24, Georgian government prime minister stated that Georgia is not going to impose its own sanctions on Russia, that Georgia, of course, will take into account the US and European sanctions, but Georgia is not going to put its own sanctions, and Georgia is not going to open another front for Russia, trying to make some military attacks against Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So we have two different opinions. Opinion number one, European Commission's decision based on lack of democratic reforms in Georgia or lack of progress. And the second one, this is pure geopolitical decision, and this is a punishment for Georgian government not to join or fully join US and EU in the war against Russia. Another topic which we are going to discuss is the recent interviews of NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And in both these interviews, the two leaders stated that Europe, or the West in general, should prepare for a long war in Ukraine, which may take maybe years. It's interesting because gradually the whole debate within the West or in the Western elites about Ukraine starting to transform from the notions that, okay, we should quickly defeat Russia through severe economic sanctions, or maybe we should knock out Russia by these economic sanctions. This debate transformed from this to the debate which makes the war in Ukraine more close to the war in Afghanistan. There is more and more messages which we receive from European elites, and including the interviews which I mentioned, Boris Johnson, United Kingdom Prime Minister, and Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, said yes, this war may take years, this is a very problematic war, but we should support Ukraine, we should supply more and more weapons to Ukraine so that Ukraine will be able to defend itself, even if war takes 4 years. So interestingly, we have the pattern when, from at least for part of the Western elites, the war in Ukraine is simply becoming a way to weaken Russia. Like the war in Afghanistan in 1980s became an instrument to weaken Soviet Union. And also in 1980s, there was a huge support, especially by the United States, to the fighters, Pushtun fighters, who were fighting against Soviet Union. So these recent articles are also sending messages that West is not able to immediately knock out Russia economically, that yes, Russia will suffer economic pain, but Russia will suffer within several years or even within several decades. So all hopes that Russia will be collapsed or will be destroyed very quickly, and war will be ended or war will be won by Ukraine. These hopes are not going to materialize, and the West should be ready for the war which may take years. And we all understand that it means that anti-Russian sanctions will be placed for years, and also a very tough impact or very negative impact of these anti-Russian sanctions on the EU and on the United States will also will be there for coming years. And especially we have to stress that the EU suffers much more from anti-Russian sanctions than the United States. So the main economic victim of these anti-Russian sanctions, after Russia of course, will be European Union itself. And at the end, let's very briefly speak about French parliamentary elections. Yesterday we have a second round, and the coalition led by President Macron, he couldn't win the majority. Yes, still it will be the number one faction in the parliament, but he will have up to 250 MPs, while within 577 National Assembly. It means that Macron will have to enter the very difficult and long coalition negotiations. The second came the interesting mix or union between socialists, leftists, and Greens, led by Mélenchon, the presidential candidate who won the third place in April 2022 presidential elections, and third came Marine Le Pen, and Marine Le Pen also increasingly increased its positions because, for example, in last parliament, Marine Le Pen has less than 10 members of parliament, while now Marine Le Pen will have 89 members of parliament. Most probably, Macron will try to form a coalition with other right centrist groups like Republicans, and if Macron and Republicans will form a coalition, they can have a government. But it means that the era of absolute hegemony of Macron on French politics, when he has absolute majority in the parliament, for example, in the period of 2017-2022, Macron had a majority of more than 300 MPs in the parliament of 577, which means that Macron could do whatever he wants. Currently, Macron has to enter into coalition negotiations, and definitely he will have much less possibilities to move forward his reform ideas. And there are very different topics, for example, the increase of retirement age from 62 to 65 and other issues. And why Macron gets this situation, and why he wasn't able to get the absolute majority in the parliament. Many experts believe that this is the first sign that the deteriorating economic situation in Europe due to the anti-Russian sanctions or due to the war in Ukraine started to have impact also on European domestic politics. So maybe the Macron was the first victim of this trend, and which means that if the war goes on for years, then we will see more and more problems for the current European elites who are mostly supporting United States and United Kingdom position to punish Russia and to do everything to weaken or even destroy Russia. So Macron now is in a difficult situation, and he will have less situation to maneuver also on its foreign policy. But again, this may be the first sign, and this could be a domino effect situation when other European elites also will face rebuke from their population. We are disappointed on the situation, especially on economic situation, because in all the European Union there is a high level inflation, food prices are rising, fuel prices are rising, and many people are concerned that these anti-Russian sanctions and these visions that the war should continue as far as possible, even for years or for decades, only to destroy or punish Russia, this may create complications. So these were 3 topics for today. We will meet. Thank you. Goodbye.